Perfect. All right, so let's dive into policies and self-care discussions with a mental health first aid instructor. And yes, I did start the recording. And the first thing I want to do is just say thank you to the School of Information at San Jose State University, who is a founding partner of this conference. And again, welcome to Policies and Self-Care Discussions with a Mental Health First Aid Instructor. My name is Taylor Atkinson, and I am the Executive Director of the Union County Library System, which is in the more rural upstate of South Carolina. So here you'll see a picture of our main library, which is the oldest Carnegie Library in the state. It's been there since 1905. And I am the executive director of the library. I've been here since 2017, first as the assistant director and now as the executive director. But I'm also personally very passionate about mental health and mental health education. So I am also a mental health first aid instructor. I have been a mental health first aid instructor for adults since 2018 and a youth mental health first aid instructor since 2019. And thank you so much to everybody who is joining. And if you're not familiar with mental health first aid, maybe you are familiar with a Red Cross or another organization, CPR first aid course. And so just like taking a Red Cross CPR first aid course could help you with somebody who is maybe experiencing a heart attack, for example, taking a mental health first aid course will allow you to identify signs and symptoms of common mental health disorders. So we look at things like anxiety, depression, other mood disorders, substance use disorders. We look at how to navigate trauma, psychosis, how to navigate crisis situations, even non-crisis situations. And then most importantly, how to navigate those situations, but B, what can we do? How can we provide information and resources for folks? So this is an 8-hour course. It's something I highly recommend taking if you are able to. But we all know as folks who work in libraries, how important it is to know how to navigate these situations, how to work with patrons who are experiencing mental illness, and how to support our staff and our employees as well. And so a primary way to do this is to examine library policies and procedures. And I really love this quote here. I had to include it. It's from Inclusive Library Service to Individuals with Mental Illnesses and Disorders. And the quote says, as champions of critical thinking, progressive thought, and information literacy, librarians are uniquely poised to help eliminate the stigma of mental illness through advocacy for users and employees, education and awareness, and even through continued emphasis on stress relief and general well-being. So those 3 words you see in red are what I'm primarily going to talk about over the next few minutes. So we're going to look at our users, our patrons, we're going to look at our employees and our staff, and then to talk about stress relief, because burnout, of course, is a very real thing. It's been a very tough couple of years navigating through COVID. Stress relief is something that we could all benefit from. So we're going to dive into my wall of text, as I like to call it. So I recognize that as a library director, I am able to directly affect the policies and procedures of my library. So if anyone here is a library director, assistant director, branch manager, board member, anybody who has the ability to directly affect policy and change, I will really ask you to please tune in. while we're talking about this. If you are somebody who works in a library and wants to bring some of these concepts to your administration and maybe want some more help, some more talking points, and being able to do so, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is going to be at the very end, and I will be more than happy to talk you through. So I recognize some of these things I'm going to talk about might be a tad controversial for some, might be a little bit more unusual. These are things that I have done in my library or things that I have helped support other libraries enact as well. And the number one thing I encourage you to do is to review your policy and procedure manuals. Hopefully this is something that is being done regularly. However, I just recently had a conversation with a fellow library director and was actually told that they were busy updating the policy manuals that had not been updated since the late 1990s, believe it or not. So this is not something that is regularly done, but I encourage you to do so. And all of your library staff, your board members, really your key stakeholders should be clear on our library policies. So the key here is that they can be consistently enforced. In a lot of my mental health trainings that I have done, I have learned that a lot of times when staff get frustrated, it's because these policies are not being consistently enforced. So maybe one manager interprets policy this way, another manager will interpret policy another way. So consistently enforced is key. And we need to make sure we're regularly examining our policies for dated language. This is also very important. And Monica, yes, I believe everything will be shared. If not, again, my email will be at the end, and please feel free to send me an email and I will gladly send it to you, of course. So another thing looking at policy, a lot of us have noise policies and or code of conduct policies. So maybe we can relook at these and see if they are flexible to potentially accommodate a non-disruptive library user, especially someone who has a mental illness. So for example, maybe you have a patron who talks to themselves, and while they can be reminded that the noise might bother others, maybe there's a study room or another quiet space that we could move them to. If we have a patron or patrons who are bothered by noise and are complaining, maybe we can offer them headphones or move them into a different space. There's a concept called humanizing existence policies, and you'll see that underlined in the middle of the slide. And humanizing existence policies are looking at policies from the point of view of we're trying to assist our patrons rather than target them. Whether we intentionally mean to or not, a lot of times our policies might target specific patrons or specific groups of people. So especially those who are experiencing homelessness, as an example. So in my library, we do not have a policy against sleeping. I know that might be controversial, but for us, what we do is I encourage my staff, or if they are not comfortable, to grab me, to grab my assistant director, to perform a wellness check. So we're simply checking on the person, making sure that they're not experiencing a medical emergency or an overdose. And we're saying, hey, are you okay? Can I get you anything? Maybe bring them a bottle of water. But otherwise, I let folks sleep in my library. Another thing that pops up a lot are hygiene or appearance concerns. So maybe instead of removing a person from the library, maybe we're able to, and whether this is something we do directly as a library or we're partnering with another agency, organization, nonprofit, maybe we're able to provide them clothing or toiletries. I'm a fairly small library system. I have a staff of 15, so pretty small staff, fairly limited resources, but about a year and a half ago, we started a community food pantry in our main library. And so we offer perishable and non-perishable foods and hygiene products to anyone in the community. Another barrier that I often see are simply library cards. So sometimes our folks don't have a permanent residence or address, and they cannot sign up for a library card. So maybe we can do something like provide a temporary card, whether that has a 30-day limit or 3-month limit, whether we only allow those folks to check out a couple of physical items, or maybe it's even a digital only card that will allow them to access ebooks, e-resources, and still allow computer access as well. The thing I always do as a library director is examine barriers. So I look at barriers and ask myself, why is this here? And is this necessary? And is this really for the good of my community? And if it's something that we need, or if there's a way that I can circumvent it. I want folks to use the library, and I want to assist with that however I can, while also keeping my staff comfortable and safe. And we'll talk more about that too. And another thing I encourage you to do is to create a local community resource guide. So include your local agencies, your nonprofits, your organizations who provide even basic needs assistance. So rental assistance, utility assistance, food banks, shelters, anything like that, or even include national resources such as the crisis text line, which is 741-741. I'm putting that in the chat. If you're like me and you don't like talking on the phone, you can utilize that text line, or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which hopefully everyone knows is now 988. So I encourage you to have and memorize both of these numbers. These are available 24/7, 365, and they're monitored by professionals. This is something that all of our library staff should be aware of. And what I encourage my staff to do, and this can be easier said than done, but to assume good intentions and act from a position of compassion whenever possible. So someone's behavior might make you uncomfortable, but that's not necessarily a threat. That strange does not equal a threat. But again, that can be easier said than done. And I encourage everyone here who is management to support your staff. We're going to talk more about that. A few more reminders for us is to, we need to review our policy and procedure manuals for outdated language. We need to review our collections as well. There are limitless numbers of books, materials, and other resources surrounding mental health. And those terms, terminology, language, ideas can be outdated very quickly, and not just outdated, but can be very offensive to groups of people. So if you are able to, I encourage you to regularly review your collections and get up-to-date materials, especially surrounding mental health. I also need to talk about security procedures. So again, I'm a smaller system of 15 staff, but I always ensure that there are at least 2 or more staff in the building at any given time. And I have heard from some directors, some folks, that maybe they have a small branch that's out in a county that's only open a day or 2 a week, and they cannot have 2 staff there. But there are workarounds. Maybe there's a board member, a friends member, or another volunteer that could be there with you. It is so important for not just safety, security, but also liability, but also if there ever is an emergency situation, to have 2 people there. So one person can be hands-on, another person can be on the phone calling 911 or whoever they need to call. I also recommend that in your resource guide, you include any non-emergency lines for your staff. So I only call 911 on very rare occasions. I've been in union for 6 years and have called 911, I would say less than 5 times in my 6 years here. However, we will call the non-emergency line. And something that I encourage you to do, if you ever are calling 911, non-emergency line, any sort of law enforcement, EMS personnel, to always give as much information as possible about the situation. So if we have a patron who's in the library who maybe is experiencing psychosis or a hallucination, instead of calling 911 and saying, you know, I have a crazy person in my library, send help. You know, this can be very harmful, and we don't exactly know how law enforcement or other personnel would respond to that situation, as opposed to saying, hi, I have, you know, a patron in the library. They are a regular, they've been in here before, but we're concerned because they are walking around talking to themselves and they seem agitated. So we're concerned for their safety and just want to make sure everything's okay. So always give as much information as possible so that 911 or whoever you're speaking to can send appropriate personnel. Now let's talk about staff wellness. So something that I have done in my library that's been very popular is creating a wellness committee. So y'all might know that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so every May, we have a professional development day for my staff, but all of this professional development day is a quiet, relaxing day. Staff can color, they can read, they can listen to music, they can play games. We have, you know, a VR headset. It's meant to be just a calm, quiet day for my staff to recharge. And that is something that my wellness committee puts on every year. I also encourage you, if possible, to have a quiet room or a space for your staff. Our frontline staff especially have to deal with a lot, and some days can be very tough, and they might need just a minute to step away, walk away, regroup, recharge. And again, that's something that we can make sure is in our policies and procedures, that they're allowed to do so, that they're allowed to take a minute for themselves. We also want to remember outside resources like an EAP if possible. And again, like I've said, our staff, especially our frontline staff, have to deal with so much on a day-to-day basis. They do it all, and they shouldn't have to do it all, but we are all often underfunded, understaffed. And this is a chance for us to get creative and think beyond libraries. I employ a full-time social worker. That is a priority for me and my staff. But this actually started a few years ago simply by us having social work interns in the library. So we partnered with the University of South Carolina, and over the past few years have hosted both undergraduate and graduate school social work interns. And that was free, something to take advantage of. We've also worked with AmeriCorps volunteers who have provided similar service. And one of those AmeriCorps volunteers actually set up our self-checkout machine. So this is something I also think is so important, even for small rural libraries to have. Our AmeriCorps intern actually used a regular computer and just a Raspberry Pi device. It cost us virtually nothing to create our self-checkout machine. And the reason for that is just privacy. If someone is checking out materials related to mental health or anything really, especially if you live in a small and rural place like I do, it is ideal for people to have privacy. And Joanna, we actually reached out to the school And I'm happy to talk more about that offline as well. But what I want to leave you with is related to self-care and wellness. And this is something maybe some of you are familiar with. I was not until a few years ago, but this is the 8 dimensions of wellness. And this comes from SAMHSA, which is the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So I don't know about y'all, but when you hear about self-care, a lot of times you hear or think about, bubble baths and putting your feet up. And that's great. I love that more than just about anyone. But I think it's so important to look at self-care from a holistic point of view. And the 8 dimensions of wellness allows you to do that. So those dimensions are spiritual, physical, occupational, financial, environmental, emotional, intellectual, and social. So again, I will be happy to email you more about this, or Google 8 dimensions of wellness, SAMHSA, and I have the name listed at the bottom of the slide. It's a step-by-step guide to wellness. So this is a 22-page PDF, and at your next professional development, staff development day, I encourage you to encourage all of your staff to fill out this guide. So I do this every year. This is kind of my New Year's resolution. And I look at each of these 8 dimensions and create goals, talk about the things I need to do to be emotionally well, intellectually well, financially well, etc. And this is something I revisit every year. So for example, when I transitioned from assistant director to executive director in union, obviously my occupational goals and needs changed. So this is something I will encourage you to do with all of your staff. And let me go ahead and put up my email. So my email is tatkinson@unionlibrary.org. And I will put that in the chat as well. I'm happy to directly email you my slides, the 8 Dimensions to Wellness PDF, our community resource guide. So y'all can use that as a template. I don't believe in gatekeeping. Or anything else that you might need. But I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. Or like I said, please feel free to send me an email. And thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Amy. That's so kind. Yes, and if anybody is ever interested in taking mental health first aid, when COVID started, pre-COVID, mental health first aid had to be taught in person. Fortunately, you can now teach virtually. So I do teach virtual courses. So if anybody is ever interested in taking the course or having your whole library staff take the course, please feel free to reach out. Lyndall, there's not a link to like a direct course. I kind of do it on a case-by-case basis. But again, feel free to send me an email and I'd be happy to talk more. And thank you, Amy, for the link. Yes, so that is a free PDF. Tiffany, so teen mental health first aid is actually taught, it's peer-to-peer. So that's actually taught for teens by teens. I do teach youth mental health first aid. So that is for adults who work with youth, if that makes sense. So a children's or teen librarian, anybody, if you're a parent, anybody can benefit from youth mental health first aid, but teen is directly peer-to-peer. Yeah, okay, I just wanted to make sure. And Joanna, I'm scrolling back up. Do you have recommendations to help staff who are feeling uncomfortable with patrons? Yes, I have some resources. Joanna, would you mind sending me an email? Yes, send me an email and I'll be happy to share more with you. These are wonderful questions, so thank y'all so much. Amanda and I will definitely email you. All right, y'all. Well, I want to give you enough time to go to your next session. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. But again, thank you so much. And please feel free to send me an email. And I hope you'll have a wonderful rest of your day.